No couple represents the power of dehumanization better than Nina and Matthias, two soldiers raised on opposing sides of a war and taught to hate one another. Matthias was raised under Fjerdan ideology, which dictates that all Grisha are abominations to nature and should be exterminated. In fact, Fjerdan seemed to believe anyone with talents beyond normal human power are evil, which is made obvious by how Matthias reacts every time he sees someone do something extraordinary. He even calls Kaz a demon because he can do sleight-of-hand tricks, and Inej a demon because she can move really quietly. But even though he has these really stringent, hateful beliefs, you can see pretty early on in the story that he's not entirely comfortable with them. We start to see this basically right away in his first perspective chapter when he's talking about Nina, and at this point he believes that she has betrayed him, but he still can't really bring himself to fully dehumanize her. Traitor, witch, abomination, all those words came to him, but others crowded in too. Beautiful, charmed one, Rød Fetla, he'd called her, little red bird, for the color of her Grisha order, the color she loved. And it isn't just Nina. Even though he's been raised in this very judgmental headspace where there's an idea that if you don't fulfill a very specific role in society, then there's something degenerate about you, he has a hard time dismissing the other crows. Very quickly, he finds himself kind of getting along with them. And you guys know the scene I'm gonna read, right? Jesper knocked his head against the hull and cast his eyes heavenward. Fine. But if Pekka Rollins kills us all, I'm going to get Wyland's ghost to teach my ghost how to play the flute, just so I can annoy the hell out of your ghost. Brecker's lips quirked. I'll just hire Matthias's ghost to kick your ghost's ass. My ghost won't associate with your ghost, Matthias said primly, and then wondered if the sea air was rotting his brain. Iconic. The ideology that Nina was raised with is nowhere near as hateful and bigoted as the Druskella belief system. The Grisha at the Little Palace are trained to defend themselves, and rightly so in a world where they are so often targeted. But over the course of the book, Nina starts to question some of the more militaristic principles she was taught. For example, when they're on the ship to Fjerda, Nina's talking about how the leaders of the Second Army send missions out searching for Grisha, and Jesper points out maybe Grisha that don't come to Ravka just want to be left alone, and it's clear Nina feels a little bit guilty about that. She hadn't been completely honest with Jesper. The Grisha Triumvirate hadn't just wanted to save Grisha from Fjerdan witch hunters. They'd sent missions to the Wandering Isle and Novia Zem because Ravka needed soldiers. Nina also learns a lot over the course of the book about how difficult it is for someone raised inside a hateful ideology to see past it, especially when those ideas are fed with fear. This starts to dawn on her when Matthias refers to her mentor, Zoya, as a powerful witch. It had hit her then. For the Druskella, Zoya was a little like Jarl Brum, cruel, inhumane, the thing that waited in the dark with death in her hands. Zoya was this boy's monster. The thought left her uneasy. There's also a really poignant moment on the ice in Fjerda when the crows have been attacked by a Grisha that Nina used to know who has been forced to take Jirdaparam. And they defeat him, but Nina is really disturbed by the whole thing. Nestor shouldn't have been able to do that, she said, her thoughts still churning. No Grisha can use power that way. It's all wrong. He, Matthias, was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Do you understand a little better now? What it's like to face a power so alien? To face an enemy with such unnatural strength? Nina tightened her hold on the pick. Nestor in the grip of Param had seemed like a perversion of everything she loved about her power. Was that what Matthias and the other Fjerdans saw in Grisha? Power beyond explanation, the natural world undone? I apologize if my Fjerdan accent is distracting to you, but I have too much fun doing it to stop. None of this excuses any of the atrocities that Fjerdans commit against Grisha, and I like that the book doesn't try to say that it does. What's happening here is Nina is starting to learn how even people with good hearts could be convinced to think that Grisha are monsters. Fear is really powerful, and it can make people believe really awful things. Matthias's origin story shows that hate against Grisha was planted in him at a very vulnerable time. While he and Nina are stranded on the ice together, he admits that his parents and baby sister were murdered during a Grisha raid on their village while he was still a child. Right afterwards, he was taken in by the Druskella. It's easy to imagine how a kid in that position could be taught that the people who killed his family are inherently evil. So he has this incredibly traumatic past, and you can see how he was just ripe for the propaganda that the Druskella exist in. And this is so deeply ingrained in him, but even that doesn't change the fact that the crows are challenging everything he thought he knew about Grisha, about other people who are different from him and think differently from him. And this is all coming to a head in the ice court when he is roiling with self-doubt. He doesn't know which way he's going to go. He still believes in everything he was taught as a child about Grisha being abominations and about Fjerdans like knowing the right way to live. But he can't deny his senses. Like, he has been seeing that these people are courageous and deeply human, like, throughout his interactions with them. And it's just, he's in this crisis, basically. And it's really hinging on him, because at any moment he can betray the other crows to the Druskella authorities that are all around them. He wasn't sure he recognized himself. On the northern ice, his choices had seemed clear, but now his thoughts were muddied with these thugs and thieves, with Inej's courage and Jesper's daring, and with Nina, always Nina. This is a really fascinating inner conflict to watch, because so often when you disagree with someone, it's so hard to imagine how they're thinking, what their justifications are, what their definitions of things are. But we get to actually see inside Matthias's mind, and we, as the readers, hopefully do not agree with him, because he's got all these really horrible, hateful ideas about people. But even though we don't agree with him, we see how his brain is working, so we can understand why he thinks the way he does. And we can see, like, the level of conflict that he is in, and we really don't know until the very last moment which way he's going to go. It's very unclear. We're rooting for his compassion and his lived experience to overcome this ideology, but it's not clear that that's the way it's going to go. And then when he locks Nina in the cell with Jarl Brum, like, while they're on the White Island, oh my god, like, it's a heart attack moment. Matthias, he slammed his fist against the window. Do not speak my name. Then he smiled, a smile as cold and unforgiving as the northern sea. Welcome to the ice court, Nina Zenek. Now our debt is paid. Oh my god, like, I literally almost suffered heart failure when I read that sentence. But then you get to the next chapter. He turned to Brum, this man who had become father and mentor to him. When he'd lost his family, it had been Brum who had recruited him to the Druskella. Matthias had been young, angry, completely unskilled, but he'd given what was left of his broken heart to the cause. A false cause. A lie. When had he seen it? When he'd helped Nina bury her friend? When he'd fought beside her? Or had it been long before, when she'd slept in his arms that first night on the ice, when she'd saved him from the shipwreck? Nina had wronged him, but she'd done it to protect her people. She'd hurt him, but she'd attempted everything in her power to make things right. She'd shown him in 1,000 ways that she was honorable and strong and generous and very human, maybe more vividly human than anyone he'd ever known. And if she was, then Grisha weren't inherently evil. They were like anyone else, full of the potential to do great good and also great harm. To ignore that would make Matthias the monster. Matthias pressed his forehead once, briefly, against Brum's. He knew his mentor couldn't hear him, but he spoke the words anyway. The life you live, the hate you feel. It's poison. I can drink it no longer. Oh my god. Oh my god. Like, reading this part for the second time, I found myself almost as moved as I was by Inej's scene in the incinerator shaft, because this is such a courageous act. Like, this is a crazy, crazy achievement. It's easy to look at this situation and think, well, yeah, obviously the Fjerdans are wrong. They're essentially Nazis. Like, they're obviously not right. But think how difficult it is to question a belief system that you have been raised with, that has just always been your truth, that everyone around you believes and everyone you love believes. Like, it is so difficult to question your core beliefs. Like, anyone. It's difficult for anyone to question your core beliefs. And think how much less, like, racism and hate and violence would exist in the world if more people were able to, like, question the beliefs and the thinking that they are used to. Like, we have whole political parties and whole governments that exist because they're really good at making people afraid of one another. And if more people were able to question that, to question why they fear others or why they hate others or why they feel anything strongly, like, we need to be able to question ourselves to make sure that we are acting as best we can, that we are, like, being as compassionate as we possibly can. You have to question yourself. And that is one of the scenes that makes me want to make the whole world read this book, because that really inspired me, personally, to question my own beliefs. Like, what do I take for granted? What are assumptions that I make? I'm really inspired to think on that and question them and be willing to change. And I don't know how you could read that passage and not feel that way. Now back to Nina. Her character development also comes to a head in the Ice Court. When Kaz first tells her about the scientist who invented Jirdaparam, Nina immediately says he must die. She has been trained to eliminate all threats to Grisha, and you can understand where she's coming from. The scientist Bulyul Bear does hold extremely dangerous knowledge. But when she is actually face to face with the scientist's son, who has that same dangerous knowledge, she can't bring herself to kill him. The right thing to do is obvious. Kill this boy, quickly, painlessly. Destroy the lab and everything in it. Eradicate the secret of Jirdaparam. If you wanted to kill a vine, you didn't just keep cutting it back. You tore it from the ground by the roots. And yet, her hands were shaking. Wasn't this the way the Druskella thought? Destroy the threat, wipe it out, no matter that the person in front of you was innocent. So she too is questioning what her conceptions of right and wrong are. Nina has learned how good people find themselves committing horrible acts when they see someone as a threat, and in this moment she's able to realize she is about to become one of those people. The violence that has defined her existence will never go away as long as people are killed just because of what they can do, just as long as they are judged by the label they are assigned rather than the person that they are. Nina is able to see that Kuei Bo is not simply the threat or the enemy. He's also just a kid. And I think Nina's transformation is slightly less stringent than Matthias's because he really has to completely reshape how he sees the world. And Nina was not raised inside a hateful ideology. She was raised to perform self-defense, which is completely different. But she was also raised in a very military setting where the belief was you eliminate the threat no matter what. And there's just more nuance in the world than that. And that's what she's coming to understand. And that's why she doesn't kill Kuei, because she can see, I'm about to become everything I hate about Fjerdans. So even though they come from completely opposite ways of thinking, Nina and Matthias go through similar journeys and come to the conclusion that a better world can't exist if we deny the humanity of others, even those we call our enemies. And even people who have been poisoned by hate, like Matthias, might be able to change if given the opportunity. One of my favorite aspects of their transformation in the way they see one another, is how their language for each other changes over the course of the book. Because at first, the only words they have for each other are Druj and Druskella, which is witch and witch hunter. And they're not saying them, like these are insults, they're using them as insults for each other. But over the course of the story, they use those same words, like, to taunt one another, then to kind of encourage one another, and then to tease one another, and then finally to be tender with one another. And it's just so beautiful to see how the same words can be used can go through this evolution along with them and turn into from something originally intended to be ugly into something so tender and beautiful. And this is really well exemplified in one of their last scenes when Nina is sick with Param on the ship ride back to Kerch. He took her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. She winced, but when he tried to pull away, she clutched him tighter. "Stay," she panted. Tears leaked from her eyes. "Stay till the end." "And after," he said, "and always." "I want to feel safe again. I want to go home to Ravka." "Then I'll take you there. We'll set fire to raisins or whatever you heathens do for fun." "Zealot," she said weakly. "Witch." "Barbarian." "Nina," he whispered. "Little red bird. Don't go." Bro, that is so romantic. Their relationship that they've developed is so beautiful and strong that even the words that are meant to be weapons against each other are now words of love and affection. That's gorgeous. I wish we just had an army of Nina Zeniks to charm the entire world out of being xenophobic, because she could totally do it.
Where did you learn how to speak Fjerdin like a native?
I speak 6 languages. It's part of my job.
So far, our characters have weaponized the oversimplified way people view each other, fought against the identities forced onto them, and learned to see past the two-dimensional ways they were taught to view others. But now we come to the crows who are struggling to see past the two-dimensional ways they view themselves. Both Wylan and Jesper are having major self-esteem issues at the opening of the book. Jesper's finding it really hard to view himself as anything other than a criminal and an adrenaline junkie, and Wylan just kind of feels defective and useless. And they both have these issues because of their fathers. The crazy thing is that Jesper actually has a good dad. Like, we learn in Six of Crows that Jesper's father saw that he wasn't happy living on a farm, and so saved as much money as he could to send Jesper to university in Ketterdam. And we actually get to meet Jesper's dad, Mr. Fahey, in the second book, in Crooked Kingdom, and it's clear that he's a really loving and devoted parent. But he has some major hang-ups about Grisha. His mother was Zemini, but his father had the Kalish blood that had given Jesper his grey eyes, and he'd never quite shaken the superstitions of the Wandering Isle. When Jesper had started to show his power, his father had been heartbroken. He'd encouraged Jesper to keep it hidden. "I'm afraid for you," he'd said. "The world can be cruel to your kind." But Jesper had always wondered if maybe his father had been a little afraid of him, too. Jesper has really internalized his father's fear of Grisha power, especially in terms of how people treat the Grisha, and to an extent you can see his point. Throughout the story we encounter Grisha who have been imprisoned, enslaved, and even burned at the stake simply for existing. But we also see how denying this part of himself has taken its toll on Jesper. He is unhealthily attracted to danger and has such a severe gambling addiction that he lost his father's farm in a bet, which is why he had to come on the Ice Court heist to begin with, so he can buy it back. So one might fairly think that this guy just needs a dose of Gerda Adderall. But the root of Jesper's problems is actually the suppression of his Grisha power. We get our first hint of this when the Crows are in a gunfight with a bunch of rival gangs right before they leave Ketterdam. Jesper always felt better when people were shooting at him. It wasn't that he liked the idea of dying. In fact, that potential outcome was a definite drawback. But if he was worrying about staying alive, he couldn't be thinking about anything else. That sound, the swift, shocking report of gunfire, called the scattered, irascible, permanently seeking part of his mind into focus like nothing else. Permanently seeking is the operative phrase here, because even if he isn't fully aware of it yet, Jesper has always known that there's a part of him missing, and not only do dangerous moments help him forget that, we learn that he is literally using his Grisha power when he's using his guns. And no, I couldn't find the quote that explicitly states that he is guiding his bullets with his fabricator power. It might be actually in the second book, but there's a scene from season 1 of the show that really, really exemplifies it well.
Are they all dead?
Cinematography. It's a well-known fact in the Grishaverse that Grisha who don't use their power become sickly, as is the case for Alina in the first Shadow and Bone book. Jesper is sickened by the repression of his powers, but his sickness is mental, his addiction. The heartbreaking thing is Jesper doesn't know that his addiction is an illness. He thinks that he just his problems are coming from his own weakness of character, which is absolutely not true. I mean, and I'm sure that's the case with a lot of people struggling with addiction, is they just think that there's something inherently wrong with them. And that's not true. Like, addiction is literally an illness. And Jesper is so guilty about the choices that he's made because of his addiction that he would literally rather be shot at than think about the fact that he has sold his father's farm. There's also a pretty telling paragraph towards the end of the book after Nina has dosed herself with Param to save the crew. Jesper worried about Nina, but thinking about her made him feel guilty. When they'd boarded the schooner and Kuei explained Param, a tiny voice inside him said he should offer to take the drug as well. Even though he was a fabricator without training, maybe he could have helped to draw the Param out of Nina's system and set her free. But that was a hero's voice, and Jesper had long since stopped thinking he had the makings of a hero. This is really sad, because not only is he saying explicitly that he doesn't have the makings of a hero, he's also implying that his life is somehow worth less than Nina's, that he's not as courageous or, worthy as she is. And there's just no evidence for that. Jesper is, incredible. The fact that he is even considering taking her place shows that he is incredibly loyal and compassionate and, a good friend. Addiction is an illness, whether you're a magical metalsmith like Jesper or not. And making mistakes because of your addiction doesn't make you weak or selfish. It means you don't have the support you need. But Jesper hasn't figured that out yet. In his eyes, he's just a loser. Wylan's perceived shortcomings are less about his actions and more about what he can do. What he can't do. He cannot read. And it's never really explained why. I've always assumed it's just because of severe dyslexia, but it also doesn't really matter. The point is he cannot read, and that really messes with his self-worth, even though he is really brilliant. Like, he is a fabulous chemist and mathematician and musician. Like, he's incredibly competent, well-rounded, and as we learn throughout the book, a very loyal and kind and competent human being. But you can see where he's getting all these self-esteem issues when you hear his dad talk about him. "Let me tell you about my son." Van Eyck, spat the word as if it were poison on his lips. "He was meant to be heir to one of the greatest fortunes in all of Kerch, an empire with shipping lines that reach all over the globe, one built by my father and my father's father. But my son, the boy meant to rule this grand empire, cannot do what a child of 7 years can. He can solve an equation, he can paint and play the flute most prettily. What my son cannot do, Mr. Brecker, is read. He cannot write. I have hired the best tutors from every corner of the world. I've tried specialists, tonics, beatings, hypnotism, but he refused to be taught. I finally had to accept that Gazan saw fit to curse me with a moron for a child. Wylan is a boy who will never grow to be a man. He is a disgrace to my house." Wow, what a giant douchebag. Even though Wylan hates his father, he can't help but feel that his insults might be accurate. They live in his mind constantly. We can guess this because of how ashamed Wylan is when he tells Kaz why his father rejected him, even though his father is clearly the one at fault. I think anybody with parents, even good parents, can understand why this is, because our parents are such a major influence on us and in the way we think, just the way our brains work, and even when we don't agree with them, it can be really hard to dismiss their opinions. But Wylan's daddy-based identity issues don't end with the constant worry that he is fundamentally flawed. Wylan has also inherited some of his father's prejudices against so-called criminals and outcasts. He displays the cognitive dissonance of wanting to be similar to the Crows in that he wants to be tough, competent, and independent, but he also wants to differentiate himself from them. Here's an example. Kaz had been impressed with the sketches. "You think like a lockpick," he'd told Wylan. "I do not. I mean, you can see space along 3 axes. I'm not a criminal," Wylan protested. Kaz had cast him an almost pitying look. "No, you're a flautist who fell in with bad company." Jesper sat down next to Wylan. "Just learn to take a compliment. Kaz doesn't hand them out often." "It's not a compliment. I'm nothing like him. I don't belong here." So here Wylan is saying that the other Crows are criminals and he's not, even though they're all doing the same thing, trying to break into the ice court and steal the prisoner. So basically he's saying that because he has moral principles, the others are criminals and he is not. This is a scaled down version of the same logic Van Eyck uses to justify releasing Jurda Param on the world, that he is a good man, so no matter what he does or how horribly he acts, he can't possibly be in the wrong. But Wylan is not his father. You get the sense from the beginning that he isn't at all sure that what he's doing is okay, especially because of how horrified he is by the violence of his comrades. And as the book progresses, he comes to see that the other Crows aren't so different from him. They are all trying to stay alive without losing their humanity, even Kaz. Wylan's journey is similar to Matthias's in that they both grow to see their comrades as complex people worthy of love and respect. By the end, he is even willing to die fighting next to them. "I've had my fill of captivity," she, Inej, said. "They won't take me alive." "Me neither," said Wylan. Jesper snorted from inside the tank. "We really need to get him some more suitable friends." But both Wylan and Jesper, over the course of the book, start to push back against this negative self-think that they both have. Jesper starts to question whether suppressing his Grisha power is really the best choice for him, and whether he might be able to live a fuller life if he embraces it. And Wylan starts to prove to himself that he is competent, that he is, like, a very intelligent human being, regardless of whether or not he can read. We also start to see them embrace their feelings for one another, which is really adorable and some of my favorite parts of the story. Of the 3 couples, though, I would definitely say that Wesper gets the least amount of development. Wylan doesn't even get his own perspective chapters until the 2nd book. But the seeds of what is to come are planted in this 1st book. Through the love and admiration they have for one another and that their friends have for both of them, Jesper and Wylan start to find this self-worth that the prejudices of their fathers initially denied them. I already talked about how the history of playing cards is symbolic of how the ideas we have are often heavily influenced by the institutions and people that have the most power in our societies. Just as the church and wealthy families controlled the way playing cards were depicted, the crows are painted as criminals and rejects less because of who they are and more because of how their society has been taught to view them. But I haven't talked that much about how the tarot in particular shows up in Six of Crows. If you aren't familiar with the tarot, here's a quick overview courtesy of the internet. Tarot cards were originated by Italian artists in the mid-1400s and consisted of the typical four-suit playing card deck, as well as another suit of trump or triumph cards. Initially meant to be used in games, tarot evolved into a divination tool, aka a means of telling the future or finding other unknown information. The suit of triumph cards are now known as the major arcana, and the other four suits, wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, are known as the minor arcana. Every tarot card has a unique meaning, and they aren't always what you would expect. For example, one of the major arcana cards is the Fool, but this doesn't necessarily stand for foolishness. It can be a symbol of freedom or a reminder of personal growth. Similarly, the Death major arcana card doesn't necessarily mean that whoever pulls it is going to experience a death. It can be a sign of release, endings, or even harvest. No tarot card has a single meaning either. Their interpretation depends a lot on the people doing the reading and the other cards that have been pulled. So while at first glance we might think we know what a card like Death, or the Fool, or the Devil, or the Lovers means, each one is actually full of complex possible definitions. The back of Six of Crows introduces the main characters as a convict, a sharpshooter, a runaway, a spy, a heartrender, and a thief. But as we know, there's a lot more to these characters than that. Both the Tarot and Six of Crows emphasize the inaccuracy of simple definitions. There are also at least two places in the book where the Tarot symbolism feels really deliberate, and I already talked about the moon and how it shows up in the first chapter. But the second example shows up even before the first chapter, when we are given the map of the Ice Court, which bears a striking resemblance to the tarot card, the Wheel of Fortune. At this point you may fairly be thinking, okay lady I found in a YouTube backwater, what do playing cards have to do with identity again? And I swear, it all connects. At its core, Six of Crows is a game. It's the collective skills and wits of the crows against the Ice Court and Van Eck, and they each have their strategies and make their moves. The nomenclature of games, particularly of card games, is prevalent throughout the book, from the title itself being a play on a card name, to Kaz's catchphrase being, if you can't beat the odds, change the game, to Jesper saying he can never walk away from a bad hand as a sort of metaphor for his own life. But who wins the game? And how do they win? It all comes down to what happens in the Ice Court. And what happens in the Ice Court is that every one of the crows embraces their humanity. Kaz finally admits to himself that he cares for his friends, and this is what drives him to get them all out alive. Inej casts off the label of the lynx forever and embraces her own path in life. Nina chooses to spare Kue Yolbo, which not only saves the life of a child but ends up benefiting the crows in the long run. Matthias rejects the hateful ideology of the Druskella, saving his comrades and himself. Jesper embraces his Grisha identity for the first time, which saves him and Wylan from the Shu mercenaries. And Wylan fully accepts his part in the gang for the first time, proving his incredible ingenuity along the way. The whole story really does come down to each of them having to make a choice about whether to reject or accept a pretty vital piece of themselves, and they each make the more truthful, more compassionate choice. And that's what leads to their collective victory in the end. And this is particularly poignant if the Ice Court is meant to symbolize the Wheel of Fortune, because the Wheel of Fortune is a card about change and transition. Whether Leigh Bardugo intentionally placed her characters inside a tarot symbol at this moment, the message of her story is clear. The winners in life are those who recognize that people are complex. We all contain good and evil and a whole bunch of stuff in between, and whether it means forgiving ourselves or opening our hearts to others, we are better off when we show compassion. So maybe binary ideas like good people and bad people don't really serve us. Maybe the best we can do is be mindful of everything we don't know, of the struggles that others are going through that we can't know anything about. And if you let go of your assumptions and refuse to hate even those who disagree with you, then maybe, just maybe, a group of lovable criminals will sweep you up in a romantic scheme full of magic, heists, and witty banter. It could totally happen. And that concludes my analysis of Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I hope it helped you get a little more meaning out of this incredible story. I'm not sure what my next video is going to be about yet, but I promise it's going to come out in less than 9 months, and it's probably not going to be about the Grishaverse just because I need to prove to myself that my brain is not completely broken and that I can focus on other things outside of this universe. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope to see you next time.